Hey everyone, it's Howard Gearhauser here on the line. You have my dad, Dr. G. Dad, can you hear me and see me okay?
Yes, hear you loud and clear.
Wonderful. So in today's video episode, we are going to talk about sepsis. So sepsis is actually largely unknown, but it is one of the leading causes of death in the United States, killing 250,000 to 270,000 Americans per year. So sepsis is caused by your body's response to an infection. So this develops when the chemicals from the immune system that release into the bloodstream to fight an infection cause inflammation throughout the entire body instead. So it's this hyperinflammation caused by an immune response to an infection. And again, this is a leading cause of death, but it might not be something that you're aware of. So what we wanted to do in today's video is give you some tools and some techniques that you can use to, number one, identify if you're in septic shock or if you have sepsis, and then also what you can do to potentially mitigate the symptoms and get you out of that dangerous position. So let's go ahead and dive right into this. Dad, can you tell us a little bit more about sepsis, why it's something that we haven't really heard of before, and just a little more background, please?
Yes, well, as you mentioned, sepsis a lot of times comes on in the hospital. So it's in a person that's maybe being exposed to a lot of different germs or viruses in the hospital, and their immune system is weakened. It's kind of almost like nature goes, kind of releases all restraints and just goes, okay, well, we're going to die if we don't have a major response, but the response is too much. So the response appears to be partially what kills us. So sepsis, and you go into septic shock, has a high fatality rate. Septic shock especially has a very high fatality rate. Even just sepsis has a 10% or more fatality rate. So it's highly fatal. But one of the things is that in medicine, it's often underappreciated because a lot of times the patient's already sick, they're already in the hospital, and they get this septic condition or sepsis, and it's blamed on the underlying condition that is the reason they're in the hospital. Say they had a heart attack, or say they were in a bad car accident, or whatever. They have all these other things going on. But then sepsis, takes you out quickly because it's such an overwhelming immune response. So here, it's often ignored that sepsis is what killed the patient. And so it's underappreciated in the statistics.
So do you think that's because, mainstream medicine and the healthcare system in a way is almost trying to cover up that this was an environmental thing caused in the hospital in terms of the infection? Why is this something that's underappreciated?
Yeah, I think it's just human nature. You go for the easiest thing to pin the cause of death on, and sepsis is kind of an ambiguous thing. If you work in an intensive care unit, you know very well what sepsis is, and because it has such a high fatality rate, and you don't have good treatments. They pour on these drugs that raise your blood pressure up to try to bring it back up to normal, but they have huge side effects, and they can shut down your kidney or cause your limbs not to get enough blood flow, so you get an amputation. So even if you survive sepsis, the morbidity or the harm caused to the person, kidney failure, heart failure, amputations, mental status decline, can be permanent and could be with that person. Even though they survive their sepsis, they now have one leg, or they now have poor kidney function, need to be on dialysis, or they need to be on a whole string of drugs for their congestive heart failure. So not only does sepsis kill so many people, but it ruins the quality of life of a lot of them that survive it, but then they have these permanent disabilities because of its disorder.
So is sepsis something that they're monitoring for, like in the ICU or in the hospital, or is this something that's kind of ignored? I mean, why isn't this something that we can catch and potentially prevent when we're in the hospital?
Well, it's just part of the way the body reacts. And as I say, our treatments aren't getting to the root of the issue. So that's part of it. We don't know what exactly triggers it. I mean, it's something the immune system gets triggered, but at this point, we don't really know what it is. And uh, a story that might help kind of sort this out is one of the doctors that came up with kind of the protocol that we're now recommending when you have sepsis, and a lot of the intensivists, that's the doctors that are in the intensive care, are using this protocol. The problem is more are not using it. Okay, so here it's Paul Merrick. Paul Merrick is a professor of internal medicine in West Virginia, I believe, and he works in the ICU and has a lot of experience in the ICU. And he tells a story. I watched an interview with him, and he tells a story of having a woman patient that developed sepsis and is going down the path that these docs see so many times, that, okay, we're piling on more and more drugs just in the hope that we could somehow turn this around. But from the experience, and he said he knew she's going to die. So it's like there's no doubt in his mind. She's like turned the corner to where there's no bringing her back. So at this point, he kind of goes, he knows from experience of doing this day in, day out, that this woman who's relatively young and was healthy before is going to die. So he kind of went back into his mind. He remembered reading an article about giving intravenous vitamin C in people with sepsis, and that there was an improvement. And then he recalled from another past memory of looking at the scientific research that if you combined intravenous vitamin C with hydrocortisone, so hydrocortisone is that stress response hormone that kind of tames our immune system. So here, where our immune system is overreacting, that's what kills us. Taming it might be helpful. And then I'm not sure why, but he also added the B vitamin thiamine at 200 milligrams, gave these all IV, just kind of, we know she's going to die, so why not try something different? So he tried this. Well, she survived. To his surprise, being almost 100% sure she's gone, she survived. So eventually, this became what's now known as the Merrick protocol, where he gives the thiamine, vitamin B1, 200 milligrams every 6 hours. I would write this down if I were you. Vitamin B1, 200 milligrams every 6 hours. IV vitamin C, 1,500 milligrams every 4 to 6 hours. And then the glucocorticoid cortisone, which is given at a dose of 50 milligrams. And I would, look that up. Don't rely on my memory. I'm not an ICU physician. But those are the ingredients of the Merrick protocol. The other ingredient of the Merrick protocol, which is probably important too, is doing the standard things that they do in the ICU when your blood pressure is crashing, and you still give the drugs to keep your blood pressure up, because if your blood pressure goes to zero, you're dead no matter what. So you might as well follow the ICU protocol until we have more info. But basically, he then did a study of this where they took 47 patients, consecutive patients that developed sepsis in the ICU, and treated them with this protocol, and then took 47 patients and did the standard ICU treatment. And what was the difference? Well, in the standard ICU treatment, of the 47, 19 died. Okay, using the Merrick protocol, none of them died from sepsis. A few of them died from their underlying condition that they had in the ICU, but none died from sepsis. In other words, their blood pressure crashing to zero and you're dead. So here was a hugely dramatic, life-saving result. So this spread, this was published, spread through the community in the ICU, and a lot of doctors have started doing this because, everybody wants to save people's lives, but a lot don't. And so that's why you need to keep this in your back of your mind, in that probably half the ICUs, they're not going to do this simple, inexpensive, almost totally safe. We'll talk about the one contraindication possibly to this protocol, and that's even relatively minor.
So that's the protocol for maybe getting out of septic shock. If you have sepsis, you're going to, again, want to write that down. So revisit that once you've finished watching this video. Make sure you jot it down. You can research this protocol as well if you'd like a little more insight on it. Now, let's get back to, how do we even know if we're in septic shock? What are some of the symptoms? I know you had an acronym that can help our listeners identify whether or not they're in septic shock or have sepsis.
Yes, well, one acronym that's been used is TIME, T-I-M-E. And so TIME, the T stands for temperature. So the temperature, if it's high, that's a fever, and it can also be low, like a chill. So if the temperature is below normal or above normal, that could be a sign. Having some infection. Just as a side note, influenza, you hear about the thousands of deaths every winter from influenza. Well, many times it's sepsis that actually kills. It's not the flu that kills, it's this condition, sepsis. So if we instigate the Merrick protocol, has a potential to save many of those people that become victims to the flu. So an infection of either viral or bacterial is the other one. The M in time is for mental status. So if you're confused, disoriented, mental status changes are, part of the picture many times. And then E is for anything that's extreme. So you have like an extreme feeling of impending doom or death. That would be one. Or you have extreme pain, like extreme muscle pain. Anything that's extreme could be a signal or a sign that maybe there's underlying sepsis. So sepsis can happen at home, doesn't always happen in the hospital. It can happen, you always hear about the cases of somebody has a little sore on their finger, their toe, or their leg, and it kind of balloons into septic shock, and it can be fatal.
So let's talk about that one time where the protocol that you mentioned might not be the protocol you want to use. Can you explain what's going on there?
Well, no, it's just that there is a contraindication to the use of vitamin C in high doses. And this is in an extremely high dose. A lot of functional medicine doctors give way higher. They give doses of like 50 grams of vitamin C. Here we're talking about 1.5 grams as a dose here. So it's not that toxic of a dose. But when you do give high doses of vitamin C, one of the contraindications of that is a genetic disorder called G6PD deficiency. So that's an enzyme. So the gene that's defective codes for this enzyme. And this enzyme is in the red blood cells. And then if you take vitamin C and you don't have a full functioning G6PD enzyme, then you get hemolysis. So your red blood cells break and that can kill you. So this is in Mediterranean or African descent mainly. It's still relatively rare, but it's estimated that 1 in 10 African Americans could have this G6PD deficiency. So it is something that, there is a test for it. So if this protocol is being contemplated, you can test for this deficiency to make sure you don't have it if you're Mediterranean descent or African descent.
Yeah, so if you are of those descents, make sure you keep an eye out for that. You don't want to have vitamin C toxicity when using this protocol. So get tested for that if you are of those descents, and maybe get tested in general if you are dealing with something like sepsis or septic shock. Now, is there anything else you wanted to add before we sign off in relation to sepsis or the protocol?
Well, I think sepsis is a big issue, but of course, we have out there are 10 lifestyle factors, 10 factors in your life that improve your immune function. So, and improve your overall health by getting to the root cause of many of the diseases that put us in the hospital to begin with. So it's much better not to get the disease to begin with. And so that's where being proactive and doing all the things, minding your circadian rhythm, minding how much non-native electromagnetic waves you're exposed to in your life, and toxins and the various things that we talk about. And the 10 most important ones, we made a video on that. So I would check that out, because that's kind of the underlying things that you should be doing 24/7, 365, so that you don't wind up being one of those people, like you don't have diabetes, or you don't get a heart attack, or you don't, get an autoimmune disorder that winds you in the hospital. And then you get exposed to these superbugs that grow in the hospital, because the hospital uses all these high-powered antibiotics. So the stuff that's remaining there is very pathogenic, and it's hard to kill with anything because it's resistant to all the known antibiotics. And that's where the infection can get a foothold and is more likely to create the syndrome of sepsis.
I totally agree. It's better to avoid the hospital and avoid, putting yourself there. Do the proactive things. I'll put a link to the 10 cutting edge health protocols that your doctor will never tell you. That's the video where we do go through our 10 most important health protocols that are really alternatives to the mainstream paradigm. So go check that out. It's about an hour long, so there's a lot of content in there, but make sure you start implementing that information. That's how you're going to prevent being in the hospital, God willing. So I think that's it for this video. We have a lot of content up, guys. We've been putting up hours of content each month. So go check that out. It's totally free. And again, make sure you're implementing it. And we appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you on the next video. Thanks.